Hey y'all, I'm Lauren and welcome to Cantina Cast. Today I am talking about The Mask of Fear written by Alexander Freed. I am giving my full review on this book today, which comes out on February 25th, and I am so excited to talk about this one in more detail because for me, I was super impressed with this book. I really, really liked it. It was very riveting. I find that a little surprising because, of course, like a lot of us know how this story is going to turn out. It takes place right before Andor. It takes place in between Revenge of the Sith and Andor, and it follows Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Saw Gerrera. And it's showing us how the three of these people started working together. We all, as Star Wars fans, have a pretty general idea of how this trilogy is probably going to end up, but I still was super surprised by a lot that was in this book. I had my jaw dropping at multiple points. Alexander Freed managed to still surprise me, even though we have already a lot of stories that take place during this era of Star Wars. So, hats off to Alexander Freed for that because that couldn't have been an easy feat. We already have so much information about this time period, but this story totally worked and still managed to surprise me. This was the first novel that I'd read by Alexander Freed. I do know that Alphabet Squadron is also by this same author, which I've heard great things about. It's already been on my list for a while, but I just haven't gotten to it yet. But now it's a priority after reading this book because I could totally see why people are saying that that is such a good series if it is anything compared to the quality of this novel. Even though we are focused on Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Saw Gerrera, we do see a lot of perspectives from other people as well. Just regular people that were living in the Republic, that lived through the Clone War, that are now trying to come to terms with the Empire. So even though those are our main characters that we're invested in, we do get some other perspectives from other less known characters that are really compelling as well. And it does a really good job of showing how different people feel differently about this whole situation of the Empire taking over. And a lot of people's reasons for feeling certain ways, a lot of them are valid. Now, you do see some people who you just totally don't agree with that are just purely interested in tyranny, and like obviously we don't agree with those people, but there's some people that are very hesitant to fight back, and you can kind of see where they're coming from too. Even if you don't agree with their ultimate decision of how to handle things, you can see where they're coming from, and that is something that is really important for me. If I can see where a character is coming from, even if I don't agree with them, that is a lot of points in my book because that's just to me like a mark of really, really good writing is when I can still empathize with the character, regardless of if I like them or if I want them to win. If I can still empathize with them, I think that's a huge success. Something I do want to point out before I start getting into spoilers is that the characters we're following, so I've already mentioned a couple times our main characters, I do want to point out that it's kind of interesting in this book because Saw Gerrera is one of our main characters that we spend a lot of time with, but he is the one character that we don't actually get inside his head. We're seeing him through the eyes of another character named Sojin, who I'll explain more about in a minute. But because of that, Saw Gerrera still does end up being somewhat of an enigma by the end of this book. We do get a lot of insight into his tactics, some insight into his motivations, but we're just kind of seeing more how exactly it got, how his crew got built over time and kind of like where he started from at the beginning of the Empire. But I just find it interesting and worth noting that we do not get inside Saw Gerrera's head quite yet. Now, we might later on in the series, and I'll get more into why I think that once I start talking spoilers. But he is still that character that is just really hard to totally nail down. You know, a lot of times we can see where he's coming from, a lot of times we can see why he is the way he is, and we can see sort of what fuels him, but he's still kind of like you don't always know what he's going to do next. And you don't always know how he's going to rationalize certain things. We also are introduced to two new characters in this novel named Chemish and Hacky, and they are two Imperial intelligence agents that are they're a couple of our point of view characters throughout this book too. To sum up everything I just said, I highly recommend this book. As I mentioned in my pre-release review, my sneak peek review about this book, if you liked the political scenes in Andor, if you like fantasy books that really focus a lot on political scheming and manipulations and stuff, then you will probably like this series. This series does that in a really, really good way. And even though it can get a little bit dense at times, just because of all of the detail of what these characters are having to go through and all of the different things that they have to keep in mind as they're navigating all this, it does have a payoff in the end. And I see why all of those details were included. So to me, it's worth it to kind of get through the little dense parts because it all does come together and you do see why we needed to have all that information. I really can't say enough good things about this book. I think if you like Andor at all, this is pretty much a must read. And I mean, that's pretty much leave it at that. I am now going to start getting into more details about this novel, talking about plot details and spoilers. So, if you have not read this yet and you're planning on it, if you do not want any spoilers, now is your time to turn back. Okay, so to get into more detail about this book, I do first want to point out some of our main themes that we are working with here. These are things that come up several times throughout the book. Some of these are going to be familiar from Andor, so it was nice to have that tie in. This very much feels kind of like a prequel to Andor. So I like it that Alexander Freed was able to tie this in to where it just is going to feel like a really seamless transition, in my opinion. So a big theme from this book is war, the Clone War, versus tyranny. And you pretty much have to pick your poison. Do you want to go back to war with the Empire, which war with the Republic was bad enough, or, if you're on the Republic side, war with the Separatists was bad enough? Do you want to go back to that whole drama, nightmare, hellscape? Or would you rather live under tyranny and take Palpatine at his word, which is we're going to have order here now? So, for people that lived through the absolute most horrible part of the war, that's kind of a difficult thing to get your head around. And a lot of those people, like regular people that suffered from food shortages during the war, having family and friends die, and all of that kind of stuff, a lot of those people are just like, why are we going to fight the Empire? I'm just going to go along with what's happening because I cannot stand to get involved in another war. It's hard to be mad at those people. It's hard to disagree with them because they went through something unimaginably horrible and they don't want to open the door on another war that they don't think they can win. That is a big thing that comes up, is just seeing how common people are responding to the Empire and are being resistant to fight back. And a lot of senators also are resistant to fight back because of what they just went through right before this. Another thing that comes up a lot is that Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Saw Gerrera, they really do not even get like 5 minutes to themselves to process all of the horrible things that they have gone through. Mon Mothma specifically has been picked up and tortured and interrogated by the Empire multiple times, and she just has to keep pushing forward. She really doesn't even have a moment to herself to process what just happened because there is just too much work that needs to be done. And with Bail Organa, we get something similar where at the beginning of the book, he hasn't been tortured by the Empire yet like Mon Mothma had been, but despite like everything that he's been through with watching the Jedi die and trying to come to terms with that, trying to figure out what to do next, there is not even a second to process any of that. And he just has to like push it all down and keep moving forward. So now I am going to talk a little bit about the highlights from the plot. This book has a lot of different plot threads that come all together at the end. So I'm not going to talk about everything that happens. If you're interested at all, you've got to just read the book because there's just so much good stuff in here that there's just not time to get to it all. But I am going to talk about some of the highlights and some of the main points that I would say are probably like the most important things to come away from this read with. So we open up the book with Mon Mothma believing that this whole situation can be salvaged. The Republic may be technically over, but we've still got to like try to mitigate the worst of this. There's still things that we can do. We've just got to play it right. Mon Mothma and Bale, they are butting heads pretty hard at the beginning of this book. The two of them, a lot of times, don't even seem to like each other. And something that's pointed out in this book is that the reason that they are even dealing with each other at all is because Padme was both of their friend. The three of them would work together on things, but without Padme, Mon Mothma and Bale have a hard time seeing eye to eye on things. They both feel the same way about the Empire being bad. I mean, that's obvious, but they have very different views on what they should do about that. Mon Mothma is very much of the opinion that we've got to play this system, and that might require us to be deceitful, might require us to lie, maybe play a little dirty, but it's all going to work out if we do what we have to do. Bale is very much an idealist. He's like, we have to do the right thing, and he's very resistant to getting down in the mud with Mon Mothma when she has to do that. The main thing that Mon Mothma decides that she's able to do to actually do something about this is to create the Imperial Rebirth Act. This is a bill that would really limit Palpatine's power. And so she spends most of the book trying to get supporters for this bill. Anyone and everyone she can that will actually maybe support it. She's making promises of things to put in the bill, some of which contradict each other, which bites her in the butt at one point. She's been talking to former separatists, which, doesn't look great, but she's like, we got to get this bill passed. I'm going to do whatever it takes. There's also some examples in this book. Like I said, she gets down in the mud at times. There are some examples in this book of Mon Mothma doing some stuff that is a little bit hard to wrap your head around. Honestly, I'm not mad about it because to me, it makes a lot of sense that a character that was a successful politician and ultimate ended up in the, biggest place of leadership in the rebellion. It makes sense to me that she has some experience being a politician, which does involve some stuff that is not pretty a lot of times. And what I'm talking about, this was one of the moments that shocked me the most. Although in retrospect, thinking about the side of her that we saw in Andor, maybe it shouldn't have been that shocking. But what I'm talking about is she at one point turns over the names of some of her friends, including Bale, to Imperial intelligence in order to get Imperial intelligence off of her and to pay more attention to them. So she sacrifices her friends to try to get a break from Imperial intelligence to be able to work on this bill without interference. And that is a moment where she does kind of consider like maybe I should feel guilty, but she also believes that it was what had to be done to be able to pass the bill. As you're reading this, you're kind of like, well, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But for her, something about her character is that she's willing to do whatever it takes as long as it furthers what she believes is the right thing. That's for better or for worse. I mean, it makes her very effective later on, but I mean, she is doing some stuff that is a little bit hard to watch because, I mean, she knows it's mean and she knows that she could be wounding these people irreversibly, but she also believes that it was what had to be done. And I think whether it actually is what had to be done is up to the reader to decide. A moment in this book that has a really big impact on Mon Mothma is that her assistant Zuna is murdered. And she's murdered in a pretty brutal way by an activist that is an Imperial supporter and is a member of an activist group that gets explored later on in the book. It seems like this murder was just a complete crazy person going insane and just doing this and intending to kill Mon Mothma, and Zuna was the one that was there. But we also get some hints in the book that it seems like there is more than just that to this murder, but it has not yet been confirmed what exactly that is. So I'm guessing that's going to be explored more in book 2, probably. We also follow Chemish and Haki, who I mentioned earlier were Imperial intelligence agents. Chemish is Haki's apprentice, and Haki is pretty much helping Chemish become a better spy for the Empire. These two are also really affected by Zuna's murder. And the reason for that is because Zuna was actually Chemish's cousin. Chemish was getting a lot of their information on Mon Mothma through Zuna. Zuna didn't know that she was providing information to an Imperial intelligence agent on Mon Mothma because Zuna was genuinely working for Mon Mothma, and Chemish, as Zuna's cousin, was just getting that information and then sending it to Haki. So that is one reason that Chemish is really affected by Zuna's murder, but also because Chemish is disturbed that one of their family members got killed in a horrible way. Haki and Chemish eventually have to split up because Haki goes to follow Bale on one of his own personal trips, and Chemish is left to continue monitoring Mon Mothma. But when Haki is gone, Chemish feels pretty out of their depth because Haki was giving Chemish a lot of guidance on not only how to be a good spy, but also just how to function in this world. And Chemish has a hard time coming to terms with all of that without Haki. But Chemish does try to kind of continue their own missions in Haki's absence because Chemish is kind of like, well, what do I do now? And one of those missions is that Chemish starts to follow the 4040s, which is the activist group that Zuna's killer was a part of. So Chemish is trying to figure out what is going on with this group. Are they actually backed by the Empire? Did Zuna get killed at the behest of the Empire, or was this genuinely just like a weird incident that happened? We don't get the full answer to that by the end of this book, but that is what Chemish is trying to figure out. And as Chemish is in the process of figuring this out, it does make them question some things about the Empire that they previously would have just accepted. There's a lot of violence and cruelty within this group that they're witnessing, and it's not really sitting right with them. It looks like Chemish in later books might become more dissatisfied with the Empire as time goes on and as they see more stuff, and they might start resisting that. I don't know yet. That just, to me, it seems like that's where it could possibly go for this character. We also get into Bail Organa's head in this book, which I was really, really glad about because we're seeing his idealism and the way that he just refuses to compromise on it for a big part of this book. One thing that he really fixates on in this book is he wants to exonerate the Jedi and clear them of Palpatine's accusations. He believes that he can do that if he is able to prove that the evidence that Palpatine has was forged. In this process, Bale's doing a lot of research, he's doing a lot of digging, talking to people, trying to track down anything that could prove this. And during this process, we're seeing his love for the Jedi. This was about a lot of the Jedi were his personal friends, which was a big impact on him, but it's also just about his love for the institution. And we even get the sense that if Bale had been force sensitive, then he might have wanted to become a Jedi himself. He might have made a great Jedi, honestly. So I thought that was really cool that we got a chance to explore that and just seeing sort of in like some of his own flashbacks about earlier in his life, we really see his genuine love for the Jedi coming through. In his quest for this evidence, he ends up at a separatist cache where they kept a lot of weapons and data banks. Coincidentally, also at that cache is Saw Gerrera and his crew. This is when Bale gets kidnapped by Saw Gerrera and spends a lot of time with this crew. And Haki was also with him at this time as well, because she was following him undercover. She's saying she's the Imperial security, but she's actually Imperial intelligence. As Bale spends more time with Haki after they're kidnapped, he starts to kind of put together that she's lying about who she is. But at this point, there's not really anything he can do about it. So he kind of just continues on with what he was doing, but he has a sense that she's not who she says she is. The reason that Saw Gerrera kidnaps Bale is basically because he saw an opportunity and took it. There's not really, it was not premeditated. It just happened that they're like, okay, this might be to our advantage. So they take Bale and Haki hostage. During Bale's kidnapping, he bonds with the character Sojin in kind of a strange way. Sojin is the character that we are in his POV when we see Saw Gerrera, and when we, as the reader, are exposed to Saw Gerrera. We're kind of getting who Saw Gerrera is through Sojin's eyes. Sojin is a really fascinating character. He is a separatist soldier who was cybernetically enhanced in what sounds like a pretty inhumane way, but he volunteered for it because he believed in the mission. And he was kept in stasis in this cache for all this time. And his original directive was that when the separatists were defeated, you are going to wake up and kill everybody. He is pretty unstable emotionally, filled with anger. Hatred for the Republic is at 100. And the reason for that is because he suffered a lot at the hands of the Republic through the Clone War. His whole village, his whole family was totally wiped out. The reason that he volunteered is because he felt strongly about how his people were suffering during the war. He is pretty dedicated to his mission, even though he's clearly very misguided about the fact that some of the people that he's going after are innocent, but you also can see why he's very, very dedicated to his mission. And this is a great example of what I was talking about earlier with how Alexander Freed balances. As the reader, we're not going to agree with this character at all, but we do empathize with him. I think Alexander Freed does that in such a great, really, really convincing way. So when Sojin is spending all this time with Bale, he responds to him, even though he disagrees with him on so much. He responds to his morals and his idealism. They kind of develop a really unlikely trust in each other. So when Bale leaves, he's able to convince Sojin, come with me to Coruscant, testify to the Senate, and we can use the evidence that you have, because Sojin in his own personal databanks did have evidence that forgeries were created about the Jedi for separatist propaganda. So Bale wants that information to be shown to the Senate, and Sojin agrees to do it. And the reason that he agrees is not only because he has an unlikely trust in Bale, but also because the way he sees it is, if I present this information to the Empire, it's gonna totally destroy the Empire from the inside. And, in his eyes, the Empire is the former Republic. So he wants turmoil in the Republic. However, once they get to Coruscant, this plan quickly falls apart. Sojin meets with Mon Mothma at Bale's request because Bale asks Mon Mothma, if you talk to him, will you allow him to testify? Mon Mothma agrees. So she's going to meet with Sojin. And after they have a conversation, Sojin decides, I can actually kill everybody in the Senate and I can kill Palpatine. And Mon Mothma sees that he is not going to actually stick to the plan that him and Bale came up with. When they're on their way to the Senate, Mon Mothma says the word that makes Sojin self-destruct, which the reason she has this word is because she got it from another senator who was a former separatist who knew who Sojin was. So she had this information going into it in case she needed it, but originally was not planning on using it. But once it became clear that Sojin was just going to destroy the Senate and not even accomplish anything, Mon Mothma was like, okay, I guess I do got to use the word. And this is a big moment for her character because it's kind of like what she views as a new low, even though, she saved all these lives by making Sojin self-destruct. She also has guilt about it too, but not regret. She feels bad that she killed him because she's ending a life of a person who is clearly troubled and disturbed and now has no hope of redemption because they died. But at the same time, she's like, I had no other choice. I had to do this. While all of that is going on, Bale is also having a huge moment of growth for his character too. While Mon Mothma is with Sojin, Bale is working on trying to get the Imperial Rebirth Act passed, right until the last minute. He's even the one that has to deliver it on the Senate floor. Even though Bale does not agree with a lot of the stuff that is in this act, he is forced to recognize the fact that this is really our best shot at limiting Palpatine's power in any way. and I have to back it even though I don't want to. Previously, Bale would not have done that because with his idealism, he was not willing to give an inch on hardly anything, but he does have to recognize that Mon Mothma's bill is kind of our best shot right now. So he gives it everything he's got for this bill, and he does actually manage to get it passed. And what comes after this is one of those moments that, like, as a reader, I'm like, why am I surprised? Because obviously I knew that something would have to kill this bill. But the way that Alexander Freed delivers this had my jaw dropping because I was just like, oh my God. Like, I wasn't surprised that it happened, but the way that it happened was just crazy to me. So after the bill passes, Masameda picks up Mon Mothma later on and takes her up to his ship and is like, what you did is cute that you thought you could limit Palpatine's power, but just so you know, we can do whatever we want. And this bill is not happening. The bill is pretty much just canceled. It's done. The bill is just over. This is when Mon Mothma is like, okay, so I cannot politic my way out of this situation that we are in with Palpatine. After this, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Saw Gerrera all meet up in secret, and the three of them pretty much argue the entire meeting. But they also recognize we have to work together. We are not going to accomplish anything, just one of us on our own, because they all just keep getting shot down. Mon Mothma just had her bill shot down in a huge way. Bale is super defeated because his evidence that he had that could potentially exonerate the Jedi was destroyed when Sujin had to self-destruct. And Saw Gerrera is just bombing a bunch of stuff and kind of spinning his wheels, not really making like that much of a dent in anything. So they're kind of like, okay, the three of us drive each other crazy. But we all hate the Empire and we all feel like something needs to be done. So the three of us are going to have to work together. It's funny because in this conversation, it doesn't seem like a lot is being accomplished, but as the reader, we know that this is the very beginning of what eventually leads to the rebellion. So I loved how this conversation was included, and I thought it was super powerful that the three of these characters clearly don't get along, but us as the reader, we know where this is going. And that scene just had me so excited for book 2 to see where this is going to go next. I am just so excited about this trilogy. I can't wait. It also, this book just has me excited for Andor coming up again. So yeah, I really, really was pumped once I got to the end of this book. And it's crazy too, because it ends on a note that our three main characters are just totally beat up and defeated. But we see that the rebellion is coming. So super excited. Like, I can't say enough good things about how this made me feel. I'm also thinking that because Sojin was killed off, I'm thinking that maybe in future books we might actually get in Saw Gerrera's head, which I'm really hoping so. Because I think that would be really, really insightful. But we'll have to see where it ends up going because we did get in Mon Mothma and Bail Organa's heads in this book in a way that we did not get in Saw Gerrera's head. We saw a lot of his tactics and we saw a lot of how his crew came together and kind of like who they were and why they were working together. And we saw some of Saw Gerrera's decision making process, but we aren't really in his head. So that would be really cool if we get that in future books. Let me know what you thought of this one. If you've read it yet, let me know if you're excited for the other books in this trilogy. And thanks so much for joining, y'all. I hope that y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.